Eli Knight, welcome, mate. Thank you for jumping on.
Thank you for having me. This is awesome.
Thanks, Eli. Eli, you've been in the martial arts industry for a long time, and I first saw you in 2018. And one of the things that really stood out with me is just how very well diverse you are, more in particular self defense. But was there ever a pivotal moment in your martial arts journey that made you decide to dive deep into self defense?
Uh, Not really, because it was when I started, everything was it was all fighting. It was more just, it was fighting arts. It was martial arts. And so, if something could be used, in, a street self-defense situation where you're being accosted by somebody or, in a ring or on a mat, there wasn't like a lot of delineation back in the old school days, and I think that a lot of the discussion about self-defense, I mean, obviously, it's like you want to know the limitations of where what you're studying will reach, because you learn some cool stuff sometimes, you learn some weird stuff sometimes, and they're just, and back in the day, it wasn't really differentiated. Like you would go into an old school karate place and you may be studying about point fighting, and the average student's not going to question initially, is this going to be effective? This kind of game of tag we're playing, is this going to be effective in a bar fight? Or what happens? Obviously, a lot of people didn't question for years and years what happens if somebody tackles me down to the ground, because once the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu kind of revolution happened in the '90s, and in the U.S. anyway, it was a big eye-opening experience. So there were a lot of people that were just doing martial arts, and you didn't really question it, right? So that's kind of how I came up. It's like you walk in, there's the teacher, the coach, the sensei, the professor, or whatever, and what they say goes, and that's what we're training tonight. And it's cool. And the thing about jujitsu, though, it's like that. I think that in and of itself was a pivotal moment, just because you go in and all of a sudden, I'd taken a karate class or taekwondo class or whatever kind of class you would take. It's like you go in and you stand in a line and you stand in the stance and you do these blocks and punches and kicks and whatever, and you can kind of see what might materialize one day, but it's very boring, And I remember my first few jiu-jitsu classes, it was like you start in the middle of things. You start, okay, you're in a headlock now. You're in a bear hug. You're in a collar grab. Somebody's trying to swing a sucker punch at you. Somebody's trying to kick you. This is the scenario. This is where you're starting. What do we do now? And the techniques were built around it that way. Then of course, like the extension of that is, you want to know what to do. Well, okay, what if we're on a different kind of surface? What if we're in a parking lot? What if somebody has a club, a hammer, a knife, a gun? There's two of them, there's three of them. So yeah, those are all considerations that you have to think about whenever you're delineating self-defense versus sport versus MMA versus whatever. But yeah, I don't know. I probably hijacked the question a little bit, but that's kind of my thought process behind it.
No, it's very well articulated, Eli. And you're a jiu-jitsu black belt. You're a third degree jiu-jitsu black belt under the legendary Royce Gracie. And there's only a handful of black belts I think he's dished out. But what was your first introduction into martial arts? How old were you? And what are some of the styles that you've practiced along the way?
Yeah, I mean, you can't really count like whenever I was a little kid because I didn't stick with it. But, we started karate, and then I remember when I was a teenager, I was probably 14, I think, when I started into yeah, about 14 years old, and I started into taekwondo, and that's all I knew that we had in the area where I was, because I was in a small city in a kind of a middle of the U.S. where there was not a lot of there weren't a lot of resources. And so I stuck with taekwondo for a little while until I met a man named Jason Hawkins, who was training in Japanese jiu-jitsu among other martial arts. I also studied Filipino martial arts, which I got into with him. And we took a big journey together, him as my coach and my professor initially, and then eventually kind of as kind of partners in a lot of it. And so that was a really cool experience for years and years. And we did everything from Muay Thai and judo and Filipino martial arts, like I mentioned, Indonesian silat, Tai Chi. Like anything we could get our hands on, there was no martial art that was untouched, that we wanted to learn everything about everything. And which is cool when you have the time, and after a while though, your focus has to kind of be a little more narrowed down. And kudos to Jason Hawkins, because he's kind of kept up with a lot more he's than I have. I kind of narrowed my focus primarily to jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai probably secondarily, and then some judo and some other stuff. I kind of fell out of love, not respect, but out of love with like Filipino martial arts and a lot of these things, just because of it didn't really fit into the paradigm that I was interested in. I look at things through enjoyment, fun, effectiveness. Those are kind of my main criteria. Like what's going to benefit me the most, and what I can also share with people that I think is going to be the most beneficial. So depending on who I'm working with, and for that matter, certain things just didn't. I didn't have the time for them anymore. So yeah, but I've gotten my hands on a lot over the years, and I love and respect all of it to some degree, some degrees more than others, with different arts, but definitely all martial arts are cool in some way or another to me. I'm still a nerdy kid about martial arts when it comes down to it.
Yeah, I'm the same, Eli. I've been in the martial arts scene for over 30 years, and I had the privilege of chatting with one of your friends, David, and it was fascinating talking to him as well, because you and David are very much self defense orientated, and a lot of the guys that we've worked with over here in Australia, we're more so interested in self defense. But did Royce Gracie have an impression on you, mate, just with regards to how jiu-jitsu is purely designed mainly for self-defense?
Oh, absolutely. If you're going to be under Hoist, coming under him and his many of his family members by association, the 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 main emphasis is going to be on self defense. It's everything from a foundational level. The biggest things that I got out of from that journey is understanding, like, on a fundamental level, there's certain kind of movements and structures and principles and concepts, and from a technical standpoint, that are going to have application across multiple different kind of paradigms, whether it's self-defense or whether it's even more sportive. There's still certain things that are going to work, now, if the emphasis from a fundamental foundational level, building from self-defense and moving whatever direction from that, I think was a really cool approach, because you never really lost sight of effectiveness. And so that gives me the ability to this day to be able to kind of specify, because I don't teach strictly self-defense oriented things when I'm teaching a class, especially depending on where I'm at. If I'm teaching a
Yes.
seminar, or I'm teaching a class of, full of purple and brown belts versus a class full of white and blue belts, or I'm teaching people who are primarily there for self-defense, or people who are wanting to compete or fight. So, you have to understand how to cater things to your audience. But I think starting from that kind of fundamental self-defense basis, you start to realize how to delineate things and what's going to work in certain contexts and what's not going to work. Some of it's obvious, some of it's not as obvious. And that's always been an interesting thing over the years. It's been interesting to see, as you're teaching something, and the questions that you get, um, that make you realize, like, oh, I didn't make this clear, that this is not something you would probably want to do in a street fight. This would probably get you hurt really bad or killed if you do this in a street fight. So you want to make those things clear if it's not blatantly obvious a lot of the time. And so I'm thankful that I have the ability to articulate that, and why my opinion is that way. Um, so that was a big benefit of coming up that direction.
Yeah. I mentioned Andrew Tate. I talked about Andrew Tate on the podcast with David. And one of the things we were discussing was there was a video that went viral of Andrew Tate putting shit on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I told David, And I said to him, Jiu-Jitsu is the only martial art on the planet that teaches you how to get back to your feet. We don't want to go to the ground unless we have to, but if you get taken to the ground, it might be because you've been taken to the ground against your will. And then there's a couple of other scenarios where jiu-jitsu might come into play. For children in a bullying scenario, it's not advisable for another child to hit another child in the playground. And also, if you're at a barbecue or a house party and one of your relatives is getting a little bit drunk or disorderly, I said to him, do you want to be doing a 50 move kata on his head when you can just use jujitsu to control and hold them down? And I think this is the problem in the martial arts world, Eli. I think you get a lot of internet trolls saying, jiu-jitsu is useless. Don't go to the ground because if you're dealing with multiple attackers and all this sort of stuff. But in your training and your expertise, Eli, what are some of the things that you found out, especially because you pressure test techniques? And I want to talk to you a little bit more about your training with bladed weapons, because that's fascinating. But what are some of the key differences that you found out with regards to jiu-jitsu and self-defense?
Well, there's several things that come to mind. Obviously, Andrew Tate, that man is walking hyperbole. Like he's everything is dialed into the level of 10 with him. And I don't think I don't think anybody is 100% good or bad person. I think that he has his positive qualities. He's obviously a very accomplished kickboxer.
Yeah,
And he probably doesn't believe a lot of the things that he hyperbolizes, if that's a word even. But it is what it is. I know the clip you're talking about. It's jiu-jitsu is useless in a street fight, and then he goes on to list a lot of the tropes that typical internet comment section trolls will dish out. The sad thing is that he's actually a fighter to whatever degree. He
he
was
is.
he was
Yeah,
actually a fighter and a martial artist, and that's
a
what's always
four-time
disappointing.
kickboxing world champion.
Yeah, and it's always disappointing to hear people who know better, who know better, but they're saying something for sensationalism. The same way Sean Strickland. Sean Strickland is the same way. He like a video of him burning his or throwing away or burning his black belt in jiu-jitsu
Yeah,
and talking
I
about how
did see
useless it
that.
is. And it's just it's silly. It's for sensationalism. They know better, but they're just trying to start some kind of conversation around. So it's all for attention. Anybody who knows anything about fighting knows how crucial it is to be able to grapple. You don't have to call it jujitsu. If you get triggered by the word jujitsu because you're like, oh no, that's catch wrestling or that's this or that's that, whatever. Grappling is grappling. Striking is striking. They both have their place. And if you know anything about fighting, you have to understand that those things are necessary and fundamental to know. There's no question. It's not even a conversation. It's not even an argument. Now, where people get contentious is when you show something like you show a technique, especially self-defense. And this is why, honestly, if you look at a lot of my social media anymore, I don't even post that much self-defense. I teach probably the majority of seminars that I go and teach is with the Knife Control Concepts course, which is obviously
Yeah,
heavily reality based and it's very self-defense based and it's very it's not very sporty, even though it's mostly wrestling and jiu-jitsu. And so people get triggered whenever you talk about grappling against someone who is trying to stab you. So
yep.
here's my rebuttal to that. Um, what what else is there? Honestly, somebody's trying to stab you. They're not trying to stab you from across the room. If they are, then run. Don't be an idiot. Nobody's saying wait till this person gets within stabbing range, or when you see the knife brandished, and then try to fight them. Nobody's saying that. We aren't idiots. If someone has you in proximity to where you have to be able to defend yourself against them trying to stab you, they're not going to stab you from a long distance, not unless they have a long sword, right? Which I don't see a lot of those in the news as being like stabbing weapons, but so they're going to stab you within grappling range, literally within grappling range. Now we can have a conversation as far as the effectiveness of striking, but the thing with striking is it is a harder to measure the qualitative and quantitative like measurements of what striking is actually going to do. I could punch you in the face and it might drop you, or you might shake it off and had virtually no effect whatsoever. And I mean, you can see this in multiple fights. You know, you can see this in street fights. You can see this in MMA. You can see it wherever. So you don't know. There's an X factor in striking. You know, there's people like to make a lot of assumptions and treat them as if they're facts. It's like if I, you know, like do like an eye poke. You know, I'll poke you in the eye, or I hit you in the throat, or I kick you in the balls, or I do this, or I do this magical thing. It's going to end the fight. It's just no. There's hell. I'll go a step further so that I don't just sound like a jiu-jitsu cheerleader. I there's certain positions that I learned that you're doing this self-defense like a headlock release. You know, you're doing a self-defense. You're getting out of the headlock, and then the end of the move, you throw an armbar on the guy. I would go so far as to say, don't do that in some situations because I may break your arm and you're going to keep fighting. You may stop, you may not.
Yeah.
You probably with a broken arm, you'll be fighting less effectively, assumingly, you know, but you're still going to keep fighting potentially. You're not going to keep fighting me if you're asleep, right? So I would elect to go for a choke over an armbar, you know. So you know, there's all these considerations to be made, and it's sometimes a nuanced conversation to be had, where you can tell people don't know what they're talking about, are when they're overly confident and they speak in absolutes. When they're like, well, this is what's going to happen if you try that. So you don't know that's what's going to
Yeah.
happen. You have no idea that's what's going to happen. Um, and, you know, so they like to say, well, if you do this, your groin's exposed, they're going to hit you in the groin. They're going to bite you. They're going to do whatever. Um, it blows my mind that the day and age that we live in right now, you can get on YouTube. It's free. You know, you can get on and watch plenty of videos on any social media platform and see crazy things happening in fights. You can
Yeah.
see one guy knock out 5 dudes in a street fight, and you can see somebody get stabbed 50 times and still escape and survive. You can also see somebody get stabbed one time and drop right there and bleed out on the spot. So, you know, there's a lot of X factors. At the end of the day, what are we doing with martial arts ultimately, especially from a self-defense context? What we're trying to do is increase our I hate that this word has been hijacked, but survivability, right? So it's our survivability, our percentage chance that we're going to leave alive and relatively unharmed from a certain situation. And that's the best that we can really hope for in a lot of those things, you know. And you know, God forbid we're having to protect somebody else. That's another consideration to take in too. But you know, that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to increase these percentage chances, and it's just a game of percents. It's not a kung fu movie. It's not, you know, any kind of John Wick anything. You're, you know, I don't care if your uncle was a Navy SEAL, Army Ranger, or whatever, special forces person. It's a lot of those guys can't fight either. So
Yeah.
it's what are we talking about here? I don't
Yeah.
know. That's a lot of thoughts, but it's a lot of stuff that comes into mind whenever you do start talking about the efficacy and the realism of grappling, and which, you know, I'll call it for simple purposes, in a a real life, essentially no rules encounter.
You mentioned a lot of things in there, Eli, and in particular, and no, it was very well thought out too, mate. And you're right. I think the idea of self defense, it's ugly, it's fast, it happens suddenly, and I know some of the videos that you're talking about, some videos that do spark to mind. You know, you'll see a video where a weapon is drawn and the guy gets stabbed. Then 5 or 6 seconds later, he drops to the ground and he just bleeds out. It's fast, it's ugly, and some of your pressure testing, you know, with knives and being able to control and grapple, because we pressure test over here in Australia, Eli, and I can't believe how tired and exhausted I actually am. Like, it is really, really difficult to actually control someone when they actually have the intent to try and stab you. And it's so difficult. It's really, really hard. But what are some of the things that you've identified with regards to pressure testing for knives and self defense?
Yeah. So one of the a few things. One, when I started to talk, I guess publicly, I thought a lot of the things that I've come up training for a long time, I thought were fairly common in martial arts. And then once I started to get a little more public, I guess, and deal with people from like larger swaths of communities and all over the world, and then hearing some of the things that people would say in response really blew me away. One that I got a lot of was like, oh, if you want to learn how to defend yourself against a knife or whatever, study Filipino martial arts. And I would say, absolutely not. No, no way. Like that's they are. I've studied for a very long time. I did Pakiti Tertia, I did Eskrima, I did so several different styles of Filipino martial arts. Um, Not typically good for empty hand versus weapon. It's and that's and I honestly didn't see a lot of them even trying to say for the people that I respected in the fields. They wouldn't even really say that this is self defense. Somebody comes up, they're trying to stab you with a knife. Um, do I pull my knife out and try to fight that person? I think that's asinine. I think that's absolutely absurd. And I still see people that recommend things along those lines. Now, of course, this notwithstanding the tactical crowd, the just shoot them crowd, whatever. Great if you have your gun and you have a distance and you can do all these things, but that's another conversation. But as far as weapon versus weapon, whenever the hell you're going to find yourself in that context. I don't know when, but Filipino martial arts are great. And Filipino martial arts are
Mm.
great for teaching you a lot of things as far as like attributes. But
Yes.
as far as empty hand versus weapon,
Hmm.
it's just not really their wheelhouse. What really it comes down to is wrestling. I mean, you'll find out really fast. It doesn't take a lot of pressure testing to find out that, um, yeah, can you, somebody pulls a knife, you see it, you throw a right cross and knock them out. That can happen. You better hope it happens because
Yeah.
you're going to get maybe a couple of shots before they're not throwing a jab, they're throwing a knife. So and plus, if you listen overwhelmingly, if you read police reports, you listen overwhelmingly to stabbing victims. Um, One of the most common, almost verbatim statements that you hear is, "I didn't realize.
Yeah.
I thought I had just gotten hit. I thought he hit me until I saw the blood." Like that statement, almost verbatim, happens with so many different people who have been stabbed, and
It's
whether it's in a
terrifying.
police report or interview or whatever. Yeah, and it's scary. It's absolutely scary. So that tells you the nature of violence when it comes to a bladed weapon. Now that's notwithstanding the idea of an active killer scenario where somebody is just crazed, which is pretty astronomically rare if you think about it. The news would have us believe it's happening every other day, but it is rare that somebody just walks out onto a playground or a public square and they have a butcher knife and they're just randomly stabbing people. Now, when it happens, it's
Yeah.
so sensational and so just bizarre and horrific that it makes all the headlines. And so,
Yeah.
but it is a rare occurrence. What's much more common is, a random, not even mugging on a street, but just a random attack where somebody's wanting to take something from you and they're not wanting to go through the whole verbal process of threatening you. They're just wanting to, like, come up, shank you, take your stuff, whatever. Or it's gang related or whatever. So all those scenarios, basically what's happening is they're getting within close proximity, close enough to be able to touch you with a knife, to be able to get the pointy end into you, right? So that's why in our knife control concepts course, and we put a lot of energy into this. Myself, Aaron Janetti, and Mike Chaney were the three kind of figureheads of this, and this course has really blown up, and everybody has really given us a lot of positive feedback. And what I really appreciate and what I really love to see is that we're getting more and more like jujitsu black belts in our courses. We're getting like fighters,
Yeah.
MMA guys. We're getting these guys who are like very accomplished in their field, but they're at least
Yes.
humble
Yeah.
enough to realize, like, okay, when a weapon is introduced, a lot of things either go sideways or go out the window, and they really do. A lot of positions that are um, arguably extremely dominant positions, a lot of extremely dominant techniques and everything in grappling and then submission grappling and everything, all of a sudden now they're not nearly as dominant
Yeah.
because You don't have to have a good position to stab somebody. You don't have to have a good anything. So what we concentrate on is looking for essentially places where the pointy end can't go into us, right? In the most vague of terms. So we don't do a lot of like very stylized type arm stops, catches, interception kind of things. A lot of the things that we start with, a lot of these flows and a lot of these drills that we start with start from just a basic 2-on-1. I'm grabbing the wrist that the knife is in. Because that's ultimately, think about if I come up to you, you don't realize I'm about to stab you, I pull the knife out and I lunge for you, maybe even I hit you one time with it and I'm going to stab you again, you're going to have the oh shit response of, oh God, I got to grab this and stop this from going in me. So we take a lot of that as our starting point, essentially. But what we try to do with knife control concepts is we operate in the gray areas. We operate in the moments between entry and exit, because that is the difficult point to navigate. I think about it similar to, um, this is it's a good analogy, but I don't like to make it a lot because it can be easily misconstrued. But like trapping in like Jeet Kune Do or Wing Chun or something like that. What people see when you're practicing is it looks like patty cake. Now that's not what knife control concepts looks like. A lot of chain wrestling, but um, they're both misleading in just the spectacle of them. You know, you're not practicing the same way you wouldn't practice you may practice a 10 to 12 hit combo on pads in Muay Thai or in boxing. You're not planning to hit that entire 12 hit combo, but you're putting things together so that you're making connections. Same way in Wing Chun, same thing in Jeet Kune Do, same thing in chain wrestling and freestyle or folk style wrestling. You're chaining things together. So what we look at is, can I go from this front side 2-on-1 to an outside 2-on-1 to a back control? Now we're looking at getting things to the ground to be able to like further restrict movement. So now we're dealing with things in supine or prone positions on the ground. And we're seeing how these things can kind of correlate from a vertical to a horizontal plane. And, it's pretty impressive and amazing to watch the people that come through the course be able to kind of access these positions and access these kind of control points. And there's no, everything is a continuous kind of flow, for lack of a better term, because you have to be able to make these decisions. And the more time that you have with tactile response, with that tactile kind of feedback, the more time that you have making these kind of decisions based on their shifts in weight and energy and everything else, the better you're going to be suited, and you're not going to run into the oh shit moments of what I would refer to as the dog chasing the car. You don't want to get to a point where you're like, okay, well, I got this, now what? No, it's like there is no now what. Now what is, can you exit the situation? Can you finish this? Can you strip the weapon? Can you disarm somehow? Can you incapacitate this person? Those exist all along the way. But what we're practicing is a continuous movement, a continuous flow from position to position with um, with the emphasis on there not being arbitrary movements. It's all based on what's necessary to go at the time. And we've put a ton of work into this and the good thing about it, with 3 different brains operating on this with a lot of background experience from similar and different fields, is that it's come up with a uh, I don't like to use the word system because it feels a little too stuffy and stylized, but it's an approach that is digestible almost regardless of experience level. Of course, somebody who's an athlete is always going to have an advantage. Somebody with a wrestling background is always going to have an advantage. But we get people from virtually no background with no exposure to any kind of fighting at all that can go through this course and be fairly competent, and at least to the degree that they will have the ability to go take this information back and train it to a level of proficiency eventually, right? So that's my elevator pitch of the knife control concepts course, but it's why we believe in it so heavily, because we've between the 3 of us, we've got probably 70 years of experience, 60, 70 years of experience going on. And we've been through, we've seen and experienced things that are very effective. We've made tweaks. We've made committee-based decisions on how to like manipulate different things. We've also seen a lot of bad stuff over the years, and we've learned from a lot of mistakes that we've had to experience as well. So, and we're constantly refining. Like there'll never be a finished product.
Yes. We'd love to have you over here in Australia, Eli, you and David. You know, you
That'd be
guys have
awesome.
made waves. Yeah, you guys have made waves over here in Australia in the martial arts community. It's interesting, Dave. Eli, one of the what my favorite people that I like to train with is my coach Geordie Lavis McBain. He very much has that self defense mindset. And we were wrestling one day, and we had the gis on, and just out of the blue, he pulled out a pocket knife, and I'm like, oh shit. So we're grappling, right? We're grappling, and he's pulled out this fucking pocket knife, and I'm like, oh my god. So he's a third degree black belt as well. So, and not only that, he's a lot heavier than I am. So he's lying on top of me in Kezagatami, and then all of a sudden he pulls out this pocket knife, and I'm like, oh fuck.
Yeah,
And it changes the game. It really
yeah,
does.
it
And
does.
it does, mate. It really does. And we had an incident, Eli, a few months ago, and I was telling David about this. There was a stabbing that occurred in a shopping centre. 6 people died, and it was a mass spree stabbing. And I watched the video, and there was a couple of lessons to take away from that. In a situation like that, I'd like to get your perspective as well. Someone's presented a knife, a weapon. You've just seen him stab several people in a shopping centre. What's your thought process? What are you doing in that situation?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of definitely a lot of it depends answers there right there, but
Yes,
um, in the instance, if in the crazed instance, and again, this is an extreme example. And I definitely don't like to armchair quarterback these things because I never want to come across as saying this is what people in that instance should have done, because you don't know if you
that's
have
right.
no experience with that. You're not a fighter, you're not trained in anything. um, Trying to develop a strategy on the fly is not only virtually impossible, but not advisable, I think, because you could probably just amount to getting yourself, you're just going to be the next victim. At best case scenario, you're going to give somebody else that would have been the next victim a chance to run away. Right. So, I mean, there's that, you're the sacrificial lamb. But, I mean, if there's some way now, if I'm with someone, if I'm with a loved one, my first priority is them. Sorry, the rest of you, there's no 50 people in a shopping center that are more important than this one person that I'm with right here. You know what I'm saying? So, sorry about your luck. it's, it's not my job to, play hero when my main priority is my daughter, my fiance, my mother, whoever it is. So there's that, but that notwithstanding, I'm there by myself. I'm shopping. I'm just a regular passerby. I know what I know, and I have the physicality and the ability to do something that might be effective, then I should probably do it. Now, I'm not stupid. I'm not going to charge this person necessarily if there's another option at all. As far as do I have a weapon of my own? Do I have? Am I obviously over there? You're probably nobody's carrying a gun. So
Yeah,
that's a
yeah,
disadvantage for everyone. So um, fortunately here in the U.S., we do have people that are carrying weapons like that, and that could be an intervention policy. And I think that that's probably one of the best uses of a concealed carry program, is that you could potentially, and you see it happen a lot. It's not nearly as televised as a lot of other things, but it does happen over here that interventionism with a gun does save lives. So there is that. Is there something you can use as a longer range weapon? A stick, a pole, a broom, anything that you can use for a weapon to knock this person out and blindside this person. Now all those things notwithstanding, if you do have to physically hands-on charge this person somehow, you need to know how to make connections where you're not just impaling yourself on the weapon. So that does require some training. You need to kind of know the angle on which, if you can get it, to be able to approach this person, to be able to tackle this person, to be able to but if you can tackle this person in a way that doesn't immediately get you killed, and wrestle this person to the ground and pin them in some kind of way that does mitigate, if not completely immobilize them in a way that's not going to allow them to be able to access the weapon and to be able to kill you, then I think that that's probably preferable. And hopefully other people, you know once you take that lead, other people take the initiative that are at least capable and able-bodied to be able to kind of swarm this person. Same thing essentially with an active shooter as with somebody with a bladed weapon. Um, I think that the swarm mentality does work. It's been shown to work. Uh, and that's again, I'm with the caveat on all this that this is not my wheelhouse. This is not my area of expertise, and I don't ever want to present myself as an active killer scenario expert. There are people out there who are very competent and have studied this a lot and who do a lot of good work. Aaron Janetti is one of them. Ryan Hoover with Fit to Fight, he's another great one. I'm sure David's got some great thoughts on this thing too. There's a
Yes.
lot of people in the industry that are able to give probably more strategic answers than that. But I think that when it boils down to it, brass tacks, that's ultimately what's going to happen, is that um, somebody's going to have to get within the ability to get a hold of this person, wrestle this person into submission, whatever that means, because that's going to mitigate the most. It's going to minimize the most damage collaterally that you can in that case.
Yes. One thing that's terrifying in any situation like that, Eli, whether it even just be someone that's picked a fight with you in a bar or a nightclub, is the idea of the adrenaline dump that you get in a situation like that. And no amount of training, I guess, can sort of help you deal with that adrenaline dump. You need to pressure test this. You need to put yourself in situations where you're doing the work. But I was talking to David, and we were talking about how to deal with that adrenaline dump. What to do in the pre-fight, the during, the post-fight. What are some of the things that you talk about with your students, or even just in general? Have you got anything that you could sort of share on what to do with that situation where someone's in your face, it's going to get ugly, and how do you control yourself and be able to utilize that for, a plan of defense?
I think that some things that you can do from a preparation side, you're not going to. I don't believe in rising to the occasion. I believe in defaulting back to your level of proficiency in whatever that you've done. So I think that some things that you can do in preparation for that, scenario-based training. It's one of my least favorite types of training that's out there. I absolutely hate it. I'm not a good actor. I'm not. I'm not. I don't have the best improvisational skills, but that's more reason to have to do it. I think that understanding how to think on your feet and how to verbalize things a lot of the time is crucial. Especially like if somebody's accosting you. If this is just still at the verbal stage, you need to be able to navigate the verbal stage. You need to be able to recognize pre-fight indications, pre-fight cues. They're not always concrete, but they tend to be fairly consistent. And pre-fight cues, obviously, I think everybody's familiar with a lot of them, but there's certain verbal cues, there's certain shifting of the eyes, people looking around, like whenever they're in your face, they're talking to you, they're getting in your face, but they're also kind of checking perimeters. And part of that is two things. They're looking to see who's watching, but they're also looking to see if they have an escape route. Uh, Certain kind of weight shifts, blading posture, whenever I'm square up in your face and I'm overly square, and then all of a sudden I start blading my posture and start
Yeah.
putting one hand kind of dominant in the background, kind of know I'm about to do something. Disappearing hands, if you see, you can see my hands at first. For that matter, are my hands very wide open and splayed? Are they clenching? What are they doing? Are my hands starting to kind of disappear, like behind one of my legs, reaching for my pockets or my waistband? Those are obvious kind of things. Certain kind of like certain kind of speech patterns, which is a whole nother kind of thing to get into that gets complicated. But a lot of these kind of things, and there's more of these too that you can during scenario based training. You make the observational patterns, so you start to observe these things, and so you start to recognize them a little more suddenly. Um, in addition to that, you start to learn how to respond in ways that are more effective than other ways. So that's really important. Now, as far as dealing with things like physiological responses, because you are going to have those, then you
Yeah.
start having things. You're going to have certain physiological responses as far as like uh, tachypsychia, so things are going to happen perceptively very fast and all at once, so, and then you're going to have adrenaline dumps, like you mentioned. And in an adrenaline dump, this is partly why I encourage people to go out and compete, even if they don't have any aspirations of being some kind of champion or anything. I encourage people to go out and compete, because a lot of people who train martial arts are never going to get to a fight. So it's like, okay, well, how do we at least simulate that in a controlled environment? Well, I mean, go do a jiu-jitsu tournament, go and do a Muay Thai, smoker, like a kind of an exhibition thing, go and get
Yeah,
some matches with somebody that you don't know, who doesn't necessarily have your best well-being in mind whenever they're fighting you, and in a foreign environment that you're not used to, so these things all kind of simulate it. And honestly, I'm some of this is me. Some of this will be me preaching things I don't necessarily practice on the regular. Like, honestly, breath work is a huge thing.
yes,
And I know it seems trendy right now, but things like ice baths, and I know how it's strange that that would apply to fighting in some degree, but at the same time, when you get into a, a a pool or a tub of frozen, virtually frozen water in this ice cold water, it's hard to convince you at first that you're not going to die. So,
that's
you
right.
have to know how to breathe through that. You have to know how to accept certain things and how to get yourself back under control. And that has direct application in fighting for sure, because it is, as you're going to be redlining initially, especially if you haven't been in a lot of fights and you're unfamiliar with what's going to happen next. So there's all this stuff going on in your brain. Your breathing patterns are going to be sporadic and disrupted. So the more devices you have to be able to calm yourself, and that really all boils back at the most essential level to breath work and breath work under
Yeah,
duress. So, and this is why jujitsu is so good for everyone, because, and somebody, even in the most controlled of environments, someone who's sitting on top of you trying to strangle you is still somebody sitting on top of you trying to strangle you. And
that's
even
right.
though it is, you know that this person at the end of the day is going to be your friend and they're going to respect your tap and everything else, at the time, they're simulating murder. So they are trying to kill you. And
Yeah,
so, you're at least getting that verisimilitude of violence in that regard. And so a lot of this other stuff will complement that from a physiological and psychological level. If you understand how to control your breath, you understand how to control your breathing, you put yourself in stressful environments that you have to navigate, and we outside of going out on the weekends and getting into bar fights repeatedly, which is, probably not the best strategy. I think that that's probably some of the best preparation that you can do.
yeah. Why don't you think martial arts schools implement this into their training? Because I think it's so important, Eli. I think of self defense just like first aid. It's good to know. You hope you never have to use it, but thank fuck you do know self defense. And some of the things that I really think martial arts schools should talk about is the pre, the during the fight, and then the after fight. I had the privilege of chatting with Dean Lawler. So Dean Lawler in Australia is regarded as one of the best self-defense experts in Australia, and he's worked security and crowd control. And he wrote an article a long time ago on implementing first aid, in a self-defense situation. So hypothetical situation, you had to knock out your attacker. The attacker goes down, putting the attacker in the recovery position and then calling for police, what to do after the situation. And
It's
these are
huge.
all things, yeah, these are all things that I think that can be talked about in martial arts schools. But what do you think martial arts schools could do more of?
I the tricky part with that, and this is going back to your original question of why it's not done more often. It's not fun. It's not sexy. It's not fun. It's much more fun to go into a class, learn a cool technique of how to break somebody's arm, and then roll around and try to do it essentially for the remainder of the time. And I've got 2 hours. I've got a 9 to 5 job. I've got 2 hours, 3 hours, 1 hour a week to train, and I'm going to go in to train, and I'm probably I want to get some exercise. I want to have some social time. I want to have competition and leave out of there sweating, feeling like I did something, you know? So these are the things that people are primarily looking for. So they're going to go to the gyms that are going to be, and this is why the sport has eclipsed the sportive aspects of jiu-jitsu and martial arts in general will always eclipse the self-defense and reality-based side. And it's just because it's more fun. I mean, it really boils down to that. It's not a
That's true.
complicated answer, you know?
Yeah,
Now, for the serious people, you know, there are serious people out there who will approach it seriously. The other problem, even with those people, is they don't tend to last. Um, and I learned this watching a lot of Krav Maga people, because you know Krav Maga people when they start, it's like Krav Maga's thing is it's hyper realistic. It's very realistic. It's very violent. It's this. It's that. It's real world. It's whatever. Um, and it's good, but it's Krav Maga is kind of a Cliff's Notes of martial arts, right? Same way with Jeet Kune Do to an extent, you know. So there's these hybrid kind of martial arts that pick and pull from other places because here's an effective thing over here, here's an effective thing over here. Let's put it into this new system that's only comprised of effective quote unquote thing. Um, okay, fine, but the people who I've seen who are very serious about training in like fields of like Krav Maga, they after a while, after a number of years or a year sometimes, they start to train those things separately. Those different elements that have been borrowed from. Well, okay, so Krav Maga pulls this from boxing, this from judo, this from jiu-jitsu, this from whatever. Well, now they're going out, they're training these separate martial arts because they're trying to get a deeper knowledge of these things, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. It's good that Krav Maga could be their gateway drug into like full range martial arts training. But that's because they became serious about training and they want to get more in depth of it, and oftentimes what will happen that I've seen repeatedly over and over again is they tend to stick to one or two of those things, and eventually they're not really even going back to the Krav Maga classes, not even going back to what originally got them there. They're training something kind of different, and that's fine too. That's perfectly fine. You should do what you want to do, whatever. You're not beholden to anybody else unless it's your occupation. That's a different conversation. But um, getting back to what we were originally talking about, so I can't spend my 1, 2, 3 hours a week training and divide it up between the fighting aspects and the triage and the verbal de-escalation tactics and the multiple attacker scenarios and it's just too much. It's too much. So that's why
yes,
um it, and even to operate a facility that does I teach the jiu-jitsu classes out here at Fit to Fight. And what I always have admired about Fit to Fight, since meeting Ryan Hoover and getting my introduction into Fit to Fight like a long time ago, and coming to my first event. They do an annual event. We're on our 9th one now. I've taught it all except the first one. And there's an annual event called Hard Ready. Hard Ready is 3 days. There's usually about 8 or 9 instructors. And there's everything over that weekend from boxing and kickboxing to judo to jujitsu to more self-defense based things. There's some weapons based things. Some of it you'll go out on the range and you're shooting at targets, or you're running drills on the range that are partially live fire, partially hands-on things, and you're putting yourself in stressful and shooting under stressful environments, things like that. And then, we used to, in the last couple of years, we haven't, but we used to do some triage, like learning how to apply a tourniquet properly, learning how to pack wounds, learning how to take care of somebody who's been knocked unconscious, or if there has been a mass shooting event, how to kind of triage the area and how to like take care of what you need to, how to, third party protection to some degree. So, there's this, it's packed, it's a jam packed kind of weekend, but it's a weekend course. And I know people who run courses like that. Craig Douglas is another one who I always sing the praises of. I think Craig Douglas is one of the most brilliant minds in the industry as far as his approach to everything from hands-on fighting to weapons of all sorts. I mean, he has the ability to train. He has the ability to train a lot of different people and from a lot of different walks of life and really meet their needs successfully. whether it's law enforcement, military, paramilitary, to civilian side. And I've taken a few of his courses, and every one of them I've walked away from. What I've noticed walking out of those type of courses, if you walk out of those courses feeling like, yeah, I really crushed it, I did great, then either there's something wrong with you, right? Because you didn't. I promise you didn't. Like, nobody walks out of there feeling like, yeah, I nailed it, And you're not supposed to. You're supposed to walk out of there feeling like, oh my God, I've got so many
So
things I
much to
need
learn.
to, so much to learn, so much to work on. That's the feeling you should be walking away with, because that's going to motivate you to train in those areas of discomfort. And honestly, that's what it's about. I mean, training, it's better that somebody goes in and trains for fun and just does the fun stuff than to do nothing at all. That's that's good. It keeps things alive, keeps things going. It does something for that person. It enriches that person's life. Ultimately, what's better is that you train the areas of discomfort as much or more than the areas of comfort.
Yeah.
Honestly, that's really what it should be more about, in my opinion.
Yes. What do you think of the current wave of jiu-jitsu, Eli? It's amazing. I mean, the Danaher Death Squad and what they've done with the leg lock game, the just the competitors nowadays, and I'm just seeing the younger generation boom. I mean, what do you think of the current wave of jiu-jitsu?
And you guys are taking it over. Like, the Aussies are killing it, man. Like, yeah, I just got back from Las Vegas this last weekend, and
Did you watch the
between
CGI?
I went to CJI,
Yeah,
and I went to the ADCC. So it was a packed weekend bouncing between those two, but
yeah,
it was amazing. Like, it was incredible. Just the level of jujitsu right now. Yeah, honestly, some there's a there's going to be contention between the old school and new school people, saying like, well, the old school guys are going to have criticism of the new school and vice versa or whatever. But I think that at best, it's disingenuous to say that jiu-jitsu right now isn't the best it's ever been. It
it
absolutely,
really is.
it's
Yeah,
on
it's
a whole
amazing.
different level. And
100%.
I've got 30 years in, essentially, and looking at what's going on now, like, it's hard for me, who's made this a 30-year pursuit, to even like keep up with the current trends, and not that the trends for trendy sake, it's trends that are valuable and they're effective. And the things that, looking at how guards are being passed now, guards are being played now, looking at for a long time, jiu-jitsu got the bad reputation of, the guard pullers, the butt scooters, the this, the that. And dude, there's serious wrestling taking place now, and nobody can deny it. Nobody can deny the level. They can, but it's not accurate to deny the level of wrestling that's taking place. And it's becoming more and more well-rounded. And like I said before, you see, people who have an honest and accurate, analysis of what jiu-jitsu is, what grappling is, and what its limitations are, and how to, the need to overcome those things. So I absolutely, am. I think it's one of the greatest times to be alive in the history of martial arts, and
Yeah.
jiu-jitsu, for no other reason. Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
you Australian guys are a problem. Like, looking
Well,
at
well, I think
Levi Jones Leary and guys like that. Oh man.
I think because you guys really sort of the Americans and what you guys have done for jiu-jitsu, we had to. I think Australian had to, up their standard because the level of talent in America. Like I've been to the States many times, Eli, and I've trained, and I'll never forget this, mate. I rocked up at New York City, I think in 2019. I was a brown belt at the time, and I must have tapped out like 20 times to heel hooks. Just dudes will just let me pass their guard just so they can enter in a saddle position and heel hook. And obviously I've been training in jiu-jitsu for a long time, man. And I went back to Australia. I'm like, fuck, I've got so much to work on. I'm like, holy shit. I just couldn't believe. And the level of talent that you guys have got over there, it's really, really amazing. What do you think of the current leg lock game? In particular, there was an interesting video you did a long time ago on would you do a heel hook in a street fight? And Yeah, and it was interesting just listening to that because obviously the current wave with the leg lock game and what John Danaher has done, it's amazing. But talk to me about some of the things with leg locks and if there is anything applicable in self defense.
Sure, yeah, yeah, I think so. I mean, it's it's again, people look at it from kind of a two-dimensional standpoint a lot of the time, and it's like, oh, okay, if you, yeah, I'm probably not gonna, you know, like pull guard in a street fight, sit down on
Yeah,
my butt, try to enter into a saddle position and start attacking feet. It's probably not
or
advisable,
do
you know.
like a Nari roll and
Yeah,
just
exactly.
straight to
Yeah,
the heel.
yeah. Oh man, I did a gag video after we finished one of the knife control concepts courses, where I showed an Imanari knife defense, and it just for fun, just to
What
troll
does
people.
that look like?
It
What does
was
that look like?
hilarious. It was essentially, the I've got I grab the guy's wrist that's trying to stab me, and then I enter in for an Imanari. I take him down into a saddle position, make him stab himself in the leg. It was a complete mess.
For fun.
The
Yeah,
Yeah, it's completely for fun, completely absurd. I thought it was obvious how absurd it was. Now I do have a bit of a dry delivery on my jokes sometimes, but I thought it was absurd enough that there would
yeah,
be no question. Oh, there were questions though. There were some questions, but it is that kind of thing. It's like people, and it's a litmus test to be able to tell the people in the comment section who just don't train, who don't understand,
yeah.
because they can't tell the difference between satire and reality, and so it's. But yeah, there's obviously a place for everything. I think in a fight, you see some, like I said before, you can see some crazy things working, and what's I remember the statement a long time ago. I don't remember who said it, but I thought it was always an interesting kind of like Zen kind of statement. It's like, just because it worked doesn't mean it works, and just because it didn't work doesn't mean it doesn't work. And it's one of those things you have to kind of sit and meditate on that for a little bit. But it
Yeah,
is one of those things. It's like, no, everything's on the table. Now it's how
that's
you
right.
prioritize. It's about how you prioritize things. You go with fundamental things to begin with. So the same kind of question I feel like can be posed. Okay, would you use a foot lock or a heel hook or a knee bar or whatever in a street fight? Would you use certain sweeps in a street fight? Would you use certain, kind of more things that are more designed for the sport in a street fight? And yeah, if they can work in the proper context, in the proper scenario, in the proper situation, absolutely they can. And I think that it can be kind of correlated to the same idea of flashy moves in jiu-jitsu. It's like, okay, well, this reverse berimbolo type move or whatever, it's flashy, it's whatever. Okay, are we going to shit on it just because it's flashy and it's fancy and it looks good on
That's right.
Instagram? No, I mean, it's one of those things. It's like, it's there for a purpose. It was created as a solution to a specific situation. And then, you may have found some cross application for it in different situations. So it's effective. If it's effective, it's effective. And now it's about how you prioritize. And I don't think, for most people, I don't think are stupid enough to think that I should do a flying triangle in a street fight first thing on concrete. I don't think
Oh, yeah,
I don't think an Eamon Ari is going to be the top, the first thing to go to in a street fight. And I think most people realize that. And so where the argument becomes fallacious is, when the self-defense community, uh, looks at the sport guys and it's like, oh yeah, try that in a street fight and this is going to happen. It's like, yeah, you're probably right, but I'm also not an idiot. I wouldn't try this in a street fight first thing, and and the argument goes both ways. Sport guys have criticisms of the self-defense community, and because they take things too seriously. And so, yeah, it is one of those things. Now, getting back to the leg lock game in general, I think that it's the most advanced it's been in a long time. I was talking to
it's
somebody.
amazing.
It's
Yeah,
incredible. It's so in depth. Like the the positioning behind it, which was kind of one of the semi-legitimate criticisms of the leg lock game for a number of years. It's like, the criticism was you don't have the positional hierarchy and the positional control. So, you're not going to be able to really exercise the same amount of control as you would on upper body attacks or back attacks, right? But with the innovations that have happened, now you're starting to see the way that people are isolating the legs and to be able to attack them. And it's so advanced and it's so complex that it is extremely effective. And it is
Yeah.
now, some people, a lot of people's primary game. And those people are difficult to deal with. I mean, um, there was, I think it was Cade Rotolo after CJI was, he had some criticisms about Levi Jones Leary. And it's like, I mean, okay, but he gave you a lot of problems, and then how much of this is sour grapes, So when I see people like who was it? Aljamain Sterling. He took that this exhibition submission grappling match. I forget who it was against, but he was criticizing. Yeah, he won't stand up and wrestle with me. He won't stand up. Why would he? Like why? If I'm a sports team and I know that you're good at certain plays on offense and on defense, why would I play into your strength? Why would I not try to
Exactly.
circumvent those things? It's within the rule set. Mikey Musumeci made the best argument for it. He's like, okay, so I stand up with you and try to wrestle you, and then you take me down. You're still going to have to pass my guard. Like, you should be happy I'm sitting down to take that portion out of it for you.
That's a good
Sure,
point.
I
Yeah.
took away your 2 points for taking me down. Yeah, okay, fine. But you're going to have to pass my guard either way. So, if I sit and pull guard, you got to deal with it. My thing is in that regard is it's kind of silly. I get that wrestlers are irritated by guard pullers,
Mm.
but guard pullers are kind of irritated whenever you watch two guys hand fight for 15 minutes and nobody even comes close to a takedown. Get like partial arm drags that don't amount to anything and collar ties, and he's sitting here seeing who can slap the back of each other's neck the hardest, and we're not
Yeah.
interested in that either. So it's a complete sport, it's a complete game, and you've got to be able to operate within every aspect of that. So um,
Yes. One thing that's just amazing, Eli, is just the UFC and what it's done for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And we got to see this in the early 90s when your coach, Royce Gracie, just shocked the martial arts world on its head. It was just amazing. And I thought about this the other day, and I'm a huge Bruce Lee fan. I grew up, watching Bruce Lee. I love Bruce Lee and what he did. And Dana White always says that he was the original pioneer of mixed martial arts because he was one of the few people that sort of got the idea of to cross train in different systems. And I always wondered as to how he would have done in the UFC and also, what he also would have contributed to the martial arts scene. And I think because he did a bit of training with Gene LaBelle when he was alive. He dabbled in a bit of judo and grappling arts. But what do you think of with regards to Bruce Lee and what he did for the martial arts scene? And if he was alive today, what do you think he would have? What else would he have contributed to the martial arts community?
I think he'd be doing a lot of jiu-jitsu.
Yes,
Obviously I'm
yeah,
biased, but I think he'd be doing a lot of jiu-jitsu. I think that you can kind of see a lot of it in kind of some of his like um I guess what's the word, compatriots or something at the time that are still around today. So you look at somebody like Eric Paulson, and um, and to maybe a different degree, guys like Ron Balicki and some of the guys in the Jeet Kune Do crowd. Um, now, you have certain people from that Jeet Kune Do background that still just want to do everything and treat everything fairly equally to this day. So they're doing all kinds of things that Bruce Lee was into. I think that Bruce Lee, my personal opinion, he would have gone a little bit more the effective route. So he probably wouldn't still be doing a lot of the exotic arts. I think he probably would have,
yeah,
not been doing as much Filipino martial arts, as much Indonesian Silat, as much, um, maybe Savat, I don't know. But he'd be doing boxing, kickboxing. He'd be doing what MMA looks like
he'd be
now.
doing
And I think that
everything. Yeah,
I think so. And I think that he would have a lot of, influence and contribution. Um, you know, I you put Bruce Lee in his prime, with the interest to fight, not just to be an actor, and you throw him into 1990s, UFC, you throw him in 1990s MMA or early 90s. he probably would have done good in a weight class. He's a little guy, but and there's a lot of mythology around him, like for better or worse. And so it's not like he would have dominated, I don't think, but he would have had a lot. He would have learned, and I think
Yeah.
that what he would have contributed from an analyst, a coaching perspective, an instructor side, a brilliant martial arts mind would have been the most value. I don't think that he would have probably maybe he would have gone out and been a great fighter. I mean, you can unlock him as a UFC character on the game, so I don't you can see how he would have done, but I think that he was probably a brilliant martial arts uh, analyst and philosopher
Yeah.
and intellectual for sure.
Yeah, an amazing individual he was, Eli, and
Absolutely.
he's been gone for so long, but what an impact he made on the martial arts community! It's just incredible. You play around with hoodie jumpers and jackets and different strangulation modifications, and I like to do a play around with that too, Eli. I love jiu-jitsu in the gi. I love no gi, but I'm fixated and always been fascinated with self defense. But talk to me about some of your revelations, mate, with regards to some of the chokes that you practice in the clothing.
Yeah, it's something that's fascinating to me, which a lot of the stuff that I've put out as far as that goes, I put out an instructional called Gi to Street, and it's fairly almost everything I put out. I feel like is fairly incomplete because like what really the most effective use of clothing, I think, in the self defense context, should look a little bit more like original karate looked like, and because my personal belief from research, not just like random thoughts, but research that I've done is karate was as much or more heavily grappling than it was striking. And you can even hear famous karatekas like talk about the grappling is more for self defense, the striking is more for dueling or sport. And not to say that both don't play their place in each field, but it's when things get a little more self defense fighting in the street, it's going to be more grappling oriented. So a lot of the things that you see in karate that the bonkai or the explanation of it get left out these days is
Yes.
what a lot of the hand gestures are doing when you're doing these katas and you're doing these weird kind of things like what is this retracting hand, what is this hand doing, is this a block, is this a punch? It's like a lot of the time that fist had a handful of collar or a handful of jacket in it, and so you're actually like manipulating, you're using trips, throws, you're holding and posting while you're hitting. That's an art that's completely all but vanished, and so it would look a lot of it looked like hockey fights. I think that, hockey
Yeah.
fighters, and there's there's some overlap between hockey fights and old school original karate that I think needs to be more explored, and so it's,
You should do
um,
a video on that, Eli.
yeah, yeah. It's funny. I saw actually a video. I don't even think I watched the whole thing. I don't know where it was released, but it was John Danaher talking about
I I did
using
see that.
clothing. He had like a hockey
Yeah,
jersey on. I'm like, yeah,
yeah,
that's what I've always kind of thought. And if you look at the old uniform from like Ishinryu and a lot of these Okinawan styles, they had the shorter sleeves, they had the shorter pants, and their jackets were a little more designed for gripping and pulling, and so they were doing a lot of attachments. And again, like a lot of that, there's not a ton of popularized and mainstream records of how those types of fights looked. And it definitely doesn't look like that in any karate tournaments these days. But
yeah.
yeah, I think it is fascinating though to kind of see how that evolved and devolved and everything else.
And have you pressure tested in rolling around in hoodie jumpers and jackets? Have you practiced a bit of that?
Yeah, we've because it is different than the gi, I mean, because the gi is, it's open, you have a belt component to it, you have, long sleeves all the time. So it's different when you go to short sleeves, it's different when you go to material that tears faster. It's different
Yeah,
when you go to, like you said, with hoods, like that's a whole different kind of thing because you can pull that hood around the neck, over the face, everything. So
yeah,
in our knife control concepts course, like that's a continuation in knife control concepts The second portion of the course, we start looking at a lot more frames and posts, because it's very common to see in stabbing situations that somebody's going to grab and with
Yes.
their empty hand and hold while they stab you, because it's a control point. It's not dissimilar from, if I have a steak on my plate, I'm not just going to pick my knife up and start sawing it, right? I'm going to stab it with my fork, hold it, and cut it, right? And
Yes.
it's a weird analogy, but you kind of think of it the same way. It's like, I'm going to grab you by this material and try to stab you. So you have to deal with that posting hand, that framing hand, that grabbing hand, as well as the weapon bearing hand. So, knowing how to navigate that kind of situation, because if all you ever do is just focus 100% on the weapon bearing limb, well, what happens when they do post, or they do frame, or they do grab clothing, or they have clothing you can grab, or they switch hands in a transitional type of movement or position sometimes. So there is a lot of that to consider. And so, that all, it materializes. Now, pressure testing is a tricky thing sometimes, because what happens with pressure testing sometimes is that you tend to gamify it a little bit, and you start doing some weird things that are probably uh, because you understand the environment and you're trying to win now, and you're not just operating on a completely like lizard brain. I've got a knife and I want to stick it in you. Now you're trying to be tricky, because I know
Yes.
you're gonna use certain tactics if I'm an untrained person. So I'm gonna start doing some tricky stuff, and now you start to lose a little bit, and it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell how much of that is appropriate to leave in and how much needs to be left out, because you can never create the optimal, most perfect conditions, and you can't be the most perfect aggressor and opponent, because we are in a controlled environment. We are doing certain things that I know what you're going to do to some degree. You know what I'm going to do to some degree. So what does competition look like? Because I want to be a good training partner. I don't want to be so competitive as to like do something that would probably never materialize, but I know it's a way that I can trick you. But I also don't want to be a limp noodle, and so you have to figure out what the balance between competitiveness, compliance, and complacency. Those three things I think are really important. You don't want to be an overly complacent partner and give a false sense of security. You don't want to be overly combative and try to shut down all of these techniques that would work on an untrained person or an unskilled person. So
That's
trying to
right.
figure out how to be appropriately compliant, and offer resistance at the same time, and offer complacency or compliance, at the right times. It's a really difficult thing. So it's why it's so valuable to have good partners to train with, but also good coaches and supervisors to be able to watch and regulate that too.
Yeah. There was a video, Eli. Henna and Hiron Gracie posted this. There was a jiu-jitsu black belt in Brazil who got fatally shot. And I think the video basically showed the individual, I think, that had the gun. He had his motorbike helmet on. I
Motorcycle.
think they pulled over after a road incident. He pulled over. The jiu-jitsu guy tried to go in and tackle him, but there was a bit of a fumble. He fell over, and then the guy shot the jiu-jitsu black belt on the head. And
Yeah.
as fucking sad as that is to watch, there's a lot of lessons that we can look at and extract from that video. Point being, in self-defense, anything could happen. And we talked about it's ugly, it's violent, it's fast. But, it does sort of make you wonder, okay, we are practicing jujitsu. It's a martial art. It's fun, but there has to be some sort of realization. Okay, well, I need to make sure that if I train this way, am I training specifically for competition or street? But how do you grapple that with your students, Eli? Because I'm sure you'd have some students that would say, I'm only here for self-defense. And then you have a lot of other students that are here for competition. Because one of my worst fears, Eli, is if one of my students goes out into a car park and gets mugged or hit, and I didn't properly instruct them on what to do in a self-defense situation. But how do you grapple that with your students?
Yeah. And it kind of goes back to that thing again that we were discussing, as far as the time allotment isn't there. So you have to understand like what's going to work within the parameters of the class time, and everything else like that. So it's really one of those things where I think that there need to be separate, specific courses to be able to run through. And I'm also kind of I think that having something on the regular, even if it's like a once a week kind of thing, that's a supplemental to your class where you do some kind of training that goes beyond just the parameters of hands-on physical altercation, but looking at, scenario-based training and, that kind of stuff. And I think that it does become valuable. And going through those courses, whether it's a weekend long course periodically, there are things you can find, but that kind of stuff, there's no way, there's no really good way to get around the fact that it's supplemental, because your foundation is okay when things go hands on, because for several reasons. That's because that's going to be the ultimate pinnacle. You failed at de-escalation, you failed at avoiding the situation, you failed at all these things. It has to go hands-on, so you have to have that platform. That's also going to build your foundation and your safety net to give you the confidence a lot of the time to be able to verbally de-escalate or verbally assess the situation. Because if you don't have that, then there's a lot of things that you're going to be trying to do in the time leading up to that's going to be disingenuous, or it's going to be empty. It's going to be hollow, and it's going to come across as that too, because you don't have the confidence to be able to deal with things if it goes to level 10. So, it does have to be a supplemental thing, but, and those things can be discussed, but as far as training them, it really needs to be something that has a dedicated amount of coursework to it. And it needs to be something specific. I think that, honestly, working on your improvisational skills. I mean, there's a lot that can go a long way. It can go a really long way. I've interestingly, I don't remember who it was that first recommended it to me, but taking like something called a Toastmasters class, which is just about learning how, or an improv class, which is silly and it's for fun. But at the same time, you're learning how to think and speak extemporaneously in the moment and play off of cues that somebody else is giving you. And for our purposes, it's a, self-defense situation. It's a dangerous situation. It's a scary situation, but creating those kind of pathways in your brain is still the same kind of exercise. So learning how to develop your improvisational skills is going to have some kind of translation across from one area to the other. So whether it's we're being silly and we're acting and doing whatever, that's going to have some kind of cross compatibility to being able to verbally de-escalate a situation where somebody's accosting me.
That's so true.
I think that, but getting back to that, whether it's those kind of classes or those kind of courses, you need to do something to supplement that. If you're truly and to my, so what I as a coach, I concentrate most heavily on the physical aspect of everything. So I do delineate: is this more self-defense? Is this more sport? Is this more grappling? Is this more MMA? Whatever it is. But I do express that to the students and to the members and everything else, that if you really want to be complete from a self-defense perspective, you need to be able to operate within weapons-based scenarios that we may not get a lot of time to train in these kind of classes, and you also have to have those verbal improvisational skills. And so you need to do some kind of coursework that's going to supplement that, and it's going to enhance your ability to operate like that. Yeah. Most people suck at it, man. It's one of the number one fears is public speaking, and that is exponentially harder when you're being accosted and having to access those public speaking skills.
Yeah. You nailed it, Eli. It's interesting. You were talking about verbalization, and there was a video that went viral, and I talked to David about this as well. A gentleman in Eric Paulson's gym, he was talking about verbal jiu-jitsu. And I've been in situations myself, Eli, where I haven't actually had to physically defend myself, but I've verbally de-escalated the situation. I remember a situation I was in a bar, and I just crossed eyes with an individual, and he thought I was just looking at him funny. And his mate came over and he said, "Why the fuck do you keep staring at my mate?" And I just made some shit up. I just said, "Oh, he looks familiar. He looks really familiar." I went over there and I said, "Look, can I buy you guys a drink? You look familiar." And we just started chatting for the rest of the night.
There you go.
You can make shit up on the spot.
Absolutely.
And these are some things that I think you can educate your students on. Verbal de-escalation. Um, you know, do you talk about that with your students?
Yeah, to a degree. And again, like it's not something that I typically take up much of the class time for, because it
No.
is, but it is something along those lines. And yeah, absolutely. I think it, but it comes back to that kind of extemporaneous kind of improvisational ability. Yeah, absolutely. Lie, make anything up. You know, I mean, you could have easily gone over there and been like, yeah, you look just like my brother who I lost in a car wreck last month, and I'm still, I'm here, and this is, I've been really upset all day, and you can play on people's
Yeah.
emotions. You can do all kinds of
Yeah.
stuff like that, and so and again, when you go through scenarios, you go through scenario based training. A lot of the time, it begins with to borrow from Craig Douglas's terminology, managing unknown contacts. So you
Yeah.
work out these scenarios where somebody's approaching you, they've maybe been given instructions or they're just making it up on the fly, and it's like, hey, you motherfucker, you cut me off in traffic, and or hey, I saw you with my girlfriend, or hey, whatever it is. And again, it's still an approximation. It's still we're doing our best to simulate something, because you're still not. It's impossible to simulate the nerves and stress of that environment. It's also pretty difficult too to understand that a lot of times, especially for guys, our ego is going to get involved right away. It's like, oh, who's this guy coming up and getting in my face and telling me this stuff? Like I'm, why are you talking to me this way? And no, I didn't say this, or this guy's coming up and being obnoxious to me or to my girlfriend or something. And now I feel charged as, the guy. I'm supposed to like get
Yeah.
back in this guy's face. And so, that's, it does. It's very difficult sometimes to turn certain of those components off, but it's extremely necessary if you're going to look to best navigate that situation and get everybody out of it as safe as possible. So but it is something that does need to be discussed, and I tend to, as best I can, I explain the overwhelming importance of that, and my advice on how to train that kind of thing, and then try to outsource some of the work and recommend certain courses that are going to be valuable for building those kind of skills. If
Yeah.
I don't have the environment or the capacity to be able to do it in that moment. But yeah.
Yeah, because self defense can be extrapolated from pretty much anything. It's not just physically being able to deal with an altercation, but also being able to verbally de escalate with your words.
Absolutely.
But have you ever had to use your martial arts in the street, Eli?
uh Not per se. Like I do
No,
mention,
thank goodness. Yeah,
yes, yeah, it's there have been some times, we used to be in a place right beside a bar, so it wasn't like a street fight kind of thing, but we would have people that would walk by drunkenly and see us training on the mat and want to explain to us why what we were doing was stupid, or what they would do better, and yada yada. We've invited some of those people onto the mat, so it wasn't the most friendly of altercations, but it wasn't a full on behind
like
the
a
the
Gracie
doors
challenge
Gracie
match.
challenge. Yeah, not necessarily
Yeah,
anything quite to that extreme. But there's that, and then also things that bad decisions in my early 20s and stuff at parties, and when things get a little heated and escalated. Nothing ever got crazy violent, but it was enough to not really be the friendliest of things. And again, very bad decisions, but it's, yeah, luckily
yeah,
I haven't had a like real full on road rage kind of altercation or bar fights or anything like that. So I'd count myself very fortunate in that regard.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I chatted with an Australian mixed martial artist. His name was Victor Lyle, Eli. So he made rounds on social media with a video where he jumped into a fight where there were two dudes that were stomping on another guy's head, and he's intervened to help this guy out. And then the other two guys have turned on him, and he when I was talking to him, I said, "Were you worried about hurting them? Were you worried about them hitting their head on the concrete, and then you obviously being charged and things like that? Because these are things you have to worry about in a court of law. If you're a trained martial artist, this is going to look bad in court, because it's like a double-edged sword, Eli. You know, if you're in a situation where you need to defend yourself, you have to first, one, look after yourself, but then you also have to look after the people that you're defending yourself against, because, you know, God forbid if, you know, you had to sort of use a little bit of physical force, but then something goes wrong, you punch them, their head hits the concrete,
Yeah,
they
absolutely.
died, and now you're up for manslaughter charges. These are things that people need to think about. Hey,
Yeah, there was a documentary that I watched on I believe it was Netflix, or maybe it was just a YouTube uh, link a while back, and it was about three or four different instances of people who actually served, they got in legal trouble or they served jail time in some cases for murder or manslaughter and from the simplest of altercations. Just a parking lot
yeah,
argument turned physical, one hit, one punch was thrown, but somebody hit their head and passed away, or somebody was paralyzed or whatever. And that's the thing that so many people don't take into account, is that, yeah, I mean, it's not going to be as simple as I'm going to knock you out, right? Maybe, but maybe, I do knock you out successfully, and maybe you crack your head on the concrete, and now, again, I'm facing murder charges potentially. So it fights, like, it's they're not great if you win, they're not great if you lose, and there's so much that you can lose beyond just losing the physical aspect of it. So you
yeah,
can lose your freedom, you can lose your money, you can lose a lot. So. Uh, Hey, brother,
yeah.
I hate to do this, but two things are happening. One, so I'm gonna have to get off fairly soon. Partly my
No,
phone is
you're right.
dying. Yeah, and
Yeah,
I even charged it up before this, and for some reason my battery is just absolutely dying on this app. But I hate to cut it short because I
no, no,
want to
no.
sit
That's
down
all
and
right, Eli.
talk about
Yeah,
this. Maybe we can do a part two sometime, and have like a much longer extended conversation, because this has been
a
great.
hundred.
I've been enjoying this conversation a lot.
Yeah, yeah, 100%, Eli. Thank you so much for jumping on, mate. But yeah, hopefully we see you out here in Australia.
Oh man, that would be fantastic. I've talked to several people. I talked to a few people prior to 2020 about the potential of getting out there, and things were looking fairly promising. And then
Yeah,
2020, so
yeah,
that kind of shut the world down for a while. So, but
yeah.
I would absolutely, that's a bucket list place I would love to visit. I'd
We'd
love to train.
we'd love to have you over here, mate. It'd be
Yeah,
fantastic. Yeah.
yeah.
No worries,
Hope it.
Eli. Thank you, mate. Lovely to chat to you. And I'll
Yeah.
speak to you soon.
Thank you so much for having me on, brother. It was great talking to you.
Thanks, Eli. See you, mate.
Thank you.